Welcome and welcome back to everyone joining us on Rooted to Thrive, conversations that elevate our humanity podcast. Here's your friend Rochelle, aka Professor P. Today we have Dr. Ana Arlotta-Guerrero, retired professor at the University of Pittsburgh and former program coordinator for the CASE teacher preparation program for pre-service teachers, grades pre-K to 4. Now, and prior to that work, Dr. Arlotta Guerrero taught grades pre-K to 4 for 15 years in bilingual classrooms in Dallas, Texas. Now she is building a platform and online community, y'all, of homeschooling parents and teachers called My Learning Circle. I love that name. Now, Anna and I are members of the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium. We both were involved in a community of practice of teacher educators together for several years. And I was always impressed by her humble nature, her pure love para la gente, and her understanding that the only real help we can give teachers and the children, youth, and adults that we serve is to share power and have belief in what each of us, each of them, brings with us, brings with them to the teaching and learning process. Anna, I want to thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm so excited to join you. We talked about this before. We always, when we broke out into our small groups, you and I, if we were together, it was like always something to talk about. And it was really exciting for me when you were interested in this subject. Uh,
Mm.
it really meant a lot to me.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes, I am interested in anything that helps people thrive. Yes. And,
Yes.
we've all seen too much, and we know how
Yes.
some spaces do just the opposite, especially in learning
Mhm.
environments.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yes.
So to so today we're going to talk about more than words, teaching and thriving with multilingual learners. But before we get into that, Anna, tell us a little bit about yourself. I gave them a little bit of your receipts. Give us a little more.
Little more. I grew up in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area, and was always captivated by languages. I actually think I'm definitely old enough for this, that it was the Beatles that got me started with that. It was
Oh.
English, but it sounded different. But I was always captivated by languages. Grew up with Sicilian grandparents who were speaking Italian all around me. And interestingly, my very first job out of college before I became an educator was working for professional soccer teams. So I worked for a team in Pittsburgh and I worked for a team in Dallas. And I had the great opportunity to work with people from all around the world. And so many players would come into our cities and then bring their families and kids.
Mhm.
And sometimes people spoke some English, but many of them did not speak any English at all. And so I helped a lot with uh, helping to put kids into schools and things like that, along with my other job. And before I started teaching, and then I went back to school to become a teacher.
That's nice. I love that. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, it was a really interesting job to do, and I loved it.
Mhm.
Uh, but I had always thought about being a teacher, and I loved little kids.
Mhm.
And I felt very strongly, I think any person who teaches any grade is wonderful, but I
Mhm.
felt very strongly that young children who are starting out in preschool, in kindergarten, first grade, have to have really, really great teachers who love them and respect them.
Mhm.
And because then they get that education career started in a really positive way. And because a lot of kids don't have that, unfortunately,
Mhm.
and they get upset with with learning, you know.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because that actually leads to my next question for you.
Mhm.
And like, I'm curious, like you told us what drew you in to focus on multilingual learners, right? You're captivated by learning, excuse me,
Mhm.
languages.
Yes, yes,
And and you really wanted to focus on early
yes.
learners, like
Early
younger
learners.
ones. Yeah, like the new ones, right? Like
Definitely.
that first experience can make all the difference.
Yes.
And so I was curious, what do most educators misunderstand about multilingual
Multilingual
learners'
learners.
experiences?
It's very interesting because I actually think that a lot of people come from a good place in their heart and they're afraid of the kids because it is difficult. You're there in front of a group of children, 20, 25 kids, and hopefully no more than that. And it's all difficult. And you have different learners that are in different levels of understanding, not language, just learning. And then you have this handful of kids or more that don't speak your language. And so I think a lot of people are just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And that means to me that it is the district and or the state education departments that really need to make sure that if you have children in your classroom that are not English speakers, you are able to really in a very supportive way learn how to teach them. And
Mm,
a lot of teachers truly are not given a lot of education about it.
mhm. Yeah, same with special education too.
Exactly. So in the state of Pennsylvania, it's required to have three classes, 9 credits of
Mhm,
learning how to teach children in special ed. There's one class, 3 credits, that's required for learning how to teach multilingual learners. And I
mhm,
understand it's hard to like require a million things, but it is something that has to be incorporated into classes, like if you're teaching
mhm.
math, teaching English, reading, things like that. You should
Right.
incorporate it in
Teaching content and teaching, learn
teaching.
how to teach content
Mhm.
and the people and and learners at the same time.
Yes, exactly. Because it
Yes.
is difficult.
Uh-huh.
It's completely. I used to say to my friends, because I was in a bilingual classroom, so I would speak half a day in English and half a day in Spanish. And we can talk a little more about that because that sounds crazy
Mhm.
at first. But I used to say to my friends, I have it easier than you because I know the language of the children and we can speak the 2 languages. Whereas I had friends who were in classrooms where there were 10 different languages in their classrooms. And that is hard. But
Yes.
learning how to support the children properly is a big deal. So I think
Yeah.
once people get a little exhale, stop being fearful, and a lot of times children know a lot more English than they act like they do because they're nervous at first. And then
Mhm.
as they get more comfortable, a lot of times they know more than they let on in the beginning.
Oh, I love that you said that. I've never heard anybody share that. I love that.
Yeah.
So you just even mentioning the 10 different languages, 25 kids in the school reminded me of a relatively recent experience um, supervising or
Hmm.
coaching student
Hmm.
teachers. So um, I was actually supervising someone in a classroom where, get this, 25 out of 28 children
Wow.
were English language
Right.
learner.
Wow.
And
That's a
you
lot.
talk about a diversity of languages.
Hmm.
And the student teacher was actually an adult. She was a paraprofessional who was being supported by her district to become a
Hmm. That's
teacher.
wonderful.
Yes, it was, right? Because they bring some special skills
Oh, yeah.
that the average right
Those are great
undergraduate
programs.
doesn't.
Mhm.
Yes, from their work experience. And but she also was an English language learner some years before,
Mhm.
right? You could still hear her accent,
Mhm.
from another country. And so she actually knew Turkish, and there were about, I want to say like 5 to 7 students
From Turkey. Yeah.
from different countries,
Different.
but every country did have Turkish as one of their languages.
Oh, wow. I
So
didn't
there
even
was
know
a
that.
connection there. Yes.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, I had another student, this just came to mind, who, again, another paraprofessional who was fluent in Spanish.
Mhm.
He was Greek, fluent in Spanish, and he was in a classroom where the English language learners spoke Spanish, were Spanish dominant.
Mhm.
And he had one Portuguese student. This
Yeah, I had that one time. Yeah.
I know he is gonna like be upset with me if he's listening to this podcast because it might be obvious who he is in these streets in Philadelphia. But when I tell you, he was so nervous about like responding to the student.
Right.
But what was so powerful was that he set an intention during his student teaching to be able to have a clear conversation with the student and their parent
Mhm. That's really
when there
great.
was no requirement to do so. This was not an ESL classroom. Their gen ed class teacher did not know any of the languages other than English.
Yeah.
And so he brought such life. I don't know, it felt like music to my ears
Yeah.
to hear him speak in both Spanish and English throughout. But let me tell you, with that Portuguese student, because she raised her hand
I
because
don't
she
know
could,
what you're saying.
and I think she understood him
Right.
in
Right.
English, but or in some of the Spanish, right? Because the languages do have
Yes.
a lot
They're
of
similar.
similarities. But then when she spoke, he was like, "Oh." And what he did do, though, and I appreciated this, there was another student who was fluent Portuguese and English, and he asked for help.
Right.
These were second graders. I said, "That's what's up. I love that.
Yeah.
Love that he was a strong enough teacher, like a
Yes.
strong enough human being to get help."
Well, I'll tell you, that makes me think. I
Mhm.
did not write this in my notes to talk about, but when I very first started to teach, I had my husband is from Mexico City. And so I had spoke some Spanish. Then when we met and eventually got married, I was speaking more. But when I went back to school and became a teacher, I would say my Spanish was about 50% fluent. And
Mhm.
it just so happened that when I graduated at that time, there was a huge need in Dallas. I was right outside Dallas, Carrollton Farmers Branch. I got a shout out to them because it was a fantastic school district. Um, and they had such need for bilingual teachers. So the bilingual director said, I really want to hire you. And I said, I don't think I speak as much fluently that I need to. We have such a need. We're going to go in, you're going to speak in English too. Well, what happened for me was the kids taught me because it was so much better to mess up in front of second graders than
Mhm.
adults. And so I spent that whole first year, I know I was making mistakes. And they would just grab my face sometimes and say, Maestra, es
Oh,
así.
okay.
It's like this, it's like this. And it was so funny because they literally taught me. And I was reading books in Spanish, and if I pronounced something incorrectly, they would just tell me because you know how little kids are. They just say whatever
Perfect.
they want. And it
Yes.
really was such a learning experience.
Hmm.
And I felt after that first year, I just felt so much better. And then as I went on, my Spanish got better and better for sure. Yeah.
Yes, I bet. I bet. Well, Talk to us a little bit about the different stages children typically move through in language acquisition, and how do these stages show up in the classroom?
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, First of all,
Mhm.
when a child is, you have to know what stage they're in the beginning. And the way
Okay.
you know that is when a child comes into a school, and typically, if a child is starting in pre-K or kindergarten, all children whose first language is not English need to be
Mhm.
given a language exam. And in every state, it's a different exam, but it's typically like I know what I was familiar with was, that you'd ask 10 questions in English, and if they got past 10, if they didn't get past 10, they were called non-English speakers. Then if they got into that 10 to 20, they were limited English speakers. And then if it was 20, it was advanced. And it didn't mean that they could tell you how to do a science project, for example. It was more
Mhm.
conversational, but you
Mhm.
did know their level. So when the children even came into my bilingual classroom, I would know, and I always would say, how can I say, hate to say it this way, but like easiest child to teach with language was if
Mhm.
they were a non-English speaker and a fluent Spanish speaker, because
Ah.
that meant all I'm doing is teaching the language, and they're fluent in their own language. Because a lot of times when kids come in with at pre-K, kindergarten, even first grade, they're kind of limited sometimes. And sometimes they were hearing both languages at home. So they kind of came in with a mixture. So the
Mhm.
ones who were no English but fluent in Spanish were the ones we would get as bilingual teachers. And then everyone else would be either limited or fluent in English, and they would be in this ESL pull-out program. So
Mhm.
from the get-go, you know what level they are. And so as a teacher, if you're trained well enough in learning how to work with multilingual learners as a teacher, you should know what to expect if this child doesn't speak any English at all, or if they're just limited, or if they're fluent. And so no matter what other language, what their native language is. So typically it's and let's take first grade because pre-K is a whole other beast itself, 4-year-olds, kindergarten too. But let's take first grade, for example,
Okay.
6-year-olds say. Typically, the child who does not speak anything hardly at all um, will start to speak words, just words. So, for example, I used to always say to my PIT students, what's the one word that you think parents want their children to know in English before they come to school? And it's like, think about it, think about it. And almost always they would come up with it, bathroom.
Ah.
Because here you are, you're dropping your child off at school. They don't speak English. You don't
Mhm.
want them to have an accident. So
Mhm.
they would teach that word. And so for example, a child would start by just saying to the teacher, bathroom. That's it, just the one word, bathroom, bathroom. And that might go on for weeks. And then maybe the next thing they say is go bathroom. And then it
Mhm.
becomes go to bathroom. And then it becomes can I go to the bathroom? Because they're hearing people say it
Right.
too.
Right. Right.
A lot of teachers have, like this or something, like a sign for when a child has to go to a bathroom, but when they are using those words. Um, so what's great is um, when you are between the ages of like 6 and 11 is what researchers will say is it's the optimum time to learn a second language, to learn another language.
Mhm.
Our brains when we're young just are ready to like grab everything and learn it all. So it's a really great time. So what's great in grade school is they learn the language from hearing it over and over and over again.
Wow.
But that, there's 4 parts to the language. We have listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
Okay.
So typically, they're learning the listening first, the
Mhm.
speaking next, then the reading, and writing usually comes last. And writing in English, I mean, it's not, I mean, we would think about, say, Mandarin, for example, with characters. I don't think I could learn that very well.
Mhm.
But writing in English is not easy because we have so many rules in the English language. So that's typically why it comes last. And after they
Mhm.
learn to read more and more, they're seeing the words, so
Mhm.
they do learn. But kids learn from each other so
Yes.
easily. But it
Mm.
all goes back to a little bit of what we've talked about already is just it has to be a welcoming environment.
Yes.
Because if they're afraid of the teacher, if they're afraid of the setting, and I don't mean afraid like they're going to get hurt, but I mean, I used to tell my students, even if that little child is 3 years old, there has to be two-way respect because you can't expect a child to respect you if you don't respect them. I don't care how
Mhm.
old they are. And
That's
so
right.
if they're in that kind of classroom where it's supportive and respecting and welcoming,
Mhm.
just more open to learn because we think of ourselves like for example when you get nervous about something if you were trying to speak in this other language and if you get nervous about something you're searching for words sometimes and a lot of times that's what happens with kids.
Yeah. And also, I could imagine in this culture where people are used to doing things faster and faster and faster,
Yep.
someone hesitating to think through
Right.
these multiple words, right, and different language systems,
Yes, yes.
people are
Well,
not necessarily waiting for them.
exactly, because and it's so important. I remember when I was learning to be a teacher, and they used to tell us if you ask a child a question, it should be like wait for 10 seconds. And I would do that in my classroom, my adult classroom with the students at Pitt, and say, okay, let's count. And were all surprised how long 10 seconds is.
Seconds,
Because a
yeah.
lot of times someone will ask a child a question and then boom, they don't answer. And then they'll say, okay, you help them or you're next. And so what happens is they're hearing the question, they're
Hmm.
literally translating it into their head to their own language. Then they're coming up with an answer. Then they're translating it back into English before they can produce. And that's not quick in
Oh,
the beginning, especially. Even
right.
after a few years, it's not quick. But and if a teacher doesn't have the patience and understand that's what's going on in their head,
Hmm.
they don't give them time to answer anything or to
Right.
talk, you know.
It sounds like they might need even more than 10 seconds. Because you're talking about 10 seconds for any like
Right. For anybody.
English proficient person
Right.
speaking to an
Exactly.
proficient person. So they might need even longer.
Even longer.
And then, wow. And then you have the classroom management issue
Yep.
of, right? Like, because there's going to be the child, youth, adult who wants to answer quickly
Yep.
and they
Yep.
don't raise their hand and they don't wait and they
Yep.
say things. How you respond matters.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
And a lot of times I didn't necessarily practice this because we all spoke the two languages and then we were doing half a day in English, half a day in Spanish. But what I would teach is um, a lot of times it helps, to bring together a small group. Let's say you have 5 multilingual learners in your classroom to bring together that group and pre-teach some things. Because
Mm,
then you prepare them, or you can even say, I'm going to ask you this question, and here, what are you going to answer? Let's practice. And so they can actually practice and feel comfortable because us, I mean, I get nervous speaking Spanish sometimes if I'm joining in a big group or with adults because I'm a rusty for sure. And kids get less nervous than adults usually, but it's still scary. And so if you've
mhm.
practiced and then you also know my teacher is going to support me, my teacher is going to give me time to do this. And then as soon as they start feeling comfortable to answer questions and to talk, talk in class. Now, I know for young kids, I mean, I used to have like, I called the centers workstations all the time.
Mhm.
Well, when they're out playing, like in kinder, first grade, and they're in centers, workstations, or they're out in the playground, they tend to talk more because
Uh,
they're relaxed, they're having fun, they're with their peers,
mhm.
And so a teacher, it would be very great for a teacher to be able to walk around at that time and listen. Don't say anything, just listen. And maybe write down some anecdotal notes about, oh, I hear so and so, talking more. Because, I mean, even me, like I've gone into Pittsburgh public classrooms that had, where I did my research for my doc program
Mhm.
at Beechwood, lots of Spanish speakers. And I would go in at the start and talk to little kids in Spanish, and they wouldn't even respond to me until like the second or third visit, and then they would start talking.
Uh,
They need to warm up and feel
mhm.
comfortable.
I love that. Yeah, you're dropping a lot of
Oh,
action steps for our
thank you.
listeners, especially those who are teachers. And there are many people who are in similar roles as you who know these things
Yes.
already. I think we're talking to those people in the gen ed classroom.
Mhm.
Um, you find spaces to pre-teach your multilingual learners. That's what I heard you say. So they
Yes.
can practice that, which also allows them to, well, not allows, but it helps them lower their anxiety
Anxiety. Mhm.
and it helps them see you as supportive and
Yes.
caring.
Yes.
Then walk around and listen. Listen. That's the word of the year.
Right.
Listen when they're in centers, when
Mhm.
they're on the playground, and note what you're hearing so that
Yeah.
you can really adjust, so that you can give individualized support to students that need it. Let me tell you, one of my student teachers, this is another different student teacher. Again, another pair. I don't know what is something about the paraprofessionals I've been working with. And so, again, also was bilingual, Spanish dominant, and that she was in a school where there were many Spanish
Yes.
dominant students. People were at very different ranges. But what she would do, she actually rearranged the students in their centers when she began her student teaching. At least her mentor teacher allowed her to do that and help give them different roles. So there were a few that were quite bossy. And
As always.
I think we were talking about first grade here, but really on top of it, quick, they were going to get through most subjects pretty quickly. She gave them extra things to do to help,
Right. Right.
right? And where they felt in charge, like the bossy ones, right? And
Mhm.
then, I mean, she had students on the autism spectrum. She had students who were multilingual
Yeah.
language learners. I don't know, that was a tongue twister for me. So then, she had students with, I think there were some other intellectual disabilities, that students learning disabilities. And I mean, just the range, but they were so thoughtful about how these students were arranged and how they supported each other. She was so
That's so
thoughtful
great.
about the way the activities were designed
That's so great.
that literally those quick learners, because they're part of the community too, right?
Yep.
They were engaged the whole time
Hmm.
while they spent the necessary time with students that needed more of the
Right.
teacher support. She didn't have to be with them all the time,
Right.
but I mean, there were activities folded in to every assignment, every lesson that had every learner in mind.
Involved. Yep.
And
Yeah.
mhm,
Well,
mhm,
I'll tell you again. where I taught for 15 years, I taught various grades, but I was in the same district.
Mhm.
And we learned so much. There was so much professional development in this district. And so, what we used to always do, and I know it's hard to explain this to new teachers because at first it seems hard, but we used to have that sort of workshop, workstation mentality. So
Mhm.
it was like big group, small group, big group, small group. And people sometimes get used to reading groups, for example, and
Mhm.
going into small groups with reading groups, but maybe not anything
Right.
else. And we
Right.
always did it with everything. I would teach a whole math lesson to everybody, and then we'd go into small groups, and there would be what I called math workstations, but then there would also be, actually like working on word problems or computation, whatever it was, because everybody is at a different level. And
Mhm.
understanding, and you can't, like, say you have 25 kids, you can't
Mhm.
have 25, I mean, you could have 25 levels, but you can't have 25 groups. That's
Right.
individual. But
Right.
you group them in the proper way that you can so that you have about
Mhm.
4 groups, 5 groups. And
Mhm.
then you go around. Sometimes you have them at your table and you're working together, and then sometimes you're going around and meeting with the different groups. And
Mhm.
some kids are really high in math, but not in reading, or vice versa. So you're not always in the same group with
Mhm.
every subject. Um,
Right.
but they really liked that a lot.
Oh.
And we had so many hands-on types of
Mhm.
projects and work for them to do that they weren't getting bored. There
Right.
were always things. I even had a poster up on my wall that said, "What to do when I'm done." And so,
Ah.
because there were times when people would finish their project at this certain station, and then they'd want
Mhm.
to come to me, and I'm with a group talking and teaching, say, reading, for example. And
Mhm.
I'd say, it'd say, "What am I supposed?" I'd say, "Look at the side, go look at the
Right.
side." What do I do? And it was a list of things you could do. And
Mhm.
90% of the time, they were great. And I'd have a timer all the time, like one of those kitchen timers. And they'd come up and look at the timer and know how much time was
Mm.
left before it was going
Okay.
to ring. And
Mm.
it worked. So I do encourage anyone teaching to try to think about doing that small group, you know, parsing them out into different groups,
I
during.
love that. And you know what, Anna, this is really good. I've seen variations of what you just described too, right? That the students are in large group to small group, back to large group, rotating groups,
Yep,
rotating at different stations. I saw some magic happen with a science lesson one time. I mean, just magic,
that's so
right?
great.
And at different centers, there were, so everybody did the same thing at each center, but then some had more,
Right,
or some had different tools
right.
to use for this science project. That teaching first graders math and science at the same time, phenomenal.
It was so
Um, yeah, but always in centers, like you mentioned, always hands-on and using the timer. And this is key, that all students did know what to do at the
they
end,
are.
but they had a
Yes.
variation. They were put in color groups or
Yep,
something.
yep.
I saw people grabbing all of the
Materials,
handouts,
yes.
right, the
Yep.
materials.
Because everybody has a job. Yep.
Yes, everybody got a job. And they literally did that every time. So until they didn't have to be told that, after maybe a week.
Yes. I would, when I was taught to teach and trained in my district, and I used to pass this on to my students, I'd
Mhm.
say take the first month. It doesn't mean you're not teaching content, you are, but you're really brushing up because there's oftentimes so much regression over the summer,
Mhm.
sadly. But
Mhm.
you're kind of reviewing things in the first month. But at the same time, you're reviewing the norms, the expectations. Sometimes I hate rules. The thing I
Mhm.
don't like is I never had something where I said, don't. It was always like what you should do, not what you
Mhm.
shouldn't do. And
Mhm.
but we would go over every single day the
Yes.
routine, and then the rest of the year was magic. And I'll tell
Mhm.
you, when I was teaching, say first grade, not so much kinder and pre-K, but when I was teaching first and second grade, we had all these baskets of books that were separated into like levels, reading levels. And there was a stand that had all the Spanish books and the stand that had all the English books. And it was funny to me because I can remember in first grade this little girl who was one of the most brilliant kids in the class. And I remember her coming up to me one time and giving me this book and saying, "Is this in English or Spanish?" And I was like, "I think you probably know. Read the
That's
title."
right. Right.
But what we did was, because just to talk about this a little bit, like people will say, well, why was it a bilingual classroom?
Mhm.
They weren't learning English that fast. They actually were, because we would say it sounds crazy to say it this way, but they were learning English through Spanish.
Mhm.
Because when you give a little child from Turkey or from wherever, a book in English
Mhm.
to try to read it, they don't even know the words for the pictures in the book,
Right.
and let alone start to read. So I do wish that there could be, I know that in some places in, I want to say the San Francisco area, that there are bilingual
Mhm.
classrooms with English and Mandarin, for example, or English and
Mhm. Mhm.
Vietnamese. So it depends on your populations. But
Right.
for us, they would first start to read in Spanish, and then
Mhm.
they would get, usually by the end of first grade, reading on level in Spanish, and then we would start to go over into English. So when I taught second grade, a lot of them were reading Spanish for the first 3 or 4 months and then moved
Mhm.
into English. But
Understood.
if you have a newcomer who
Mhm.
just came from another country 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
they could be reading in Spanish. And that's what we did with the writing as well. Um,
Yes.
so they really truly learned a lot through their own language. And
Yes.
then by the end of like third grade, they were able to read, write, of course, speak, but read and write
Mhm.
in both languages. And
Look
that
at
was
that.
really cool. And then
Look
we
at
would say
that.
to parents, okay, now you need to take it from here, because we suggest that you make it a point that your child remains bilingual in the reading
Mhm.
and writing. The language they will.
Mhm.
So you should be teaching the reading and writing in Spanish at home,
There you go.
because
There
then we
you
would do all English.
That's right. Yeah, because we know of so many stories where parents were thinking, oh, in order for my child to assimilate well in this country, you know, they stopped speaking their native tongue. And so many of those children became adults
Yep.
and felt like something was missing. Yeah.
That happened in my life, because all of my
Mm,
grandparents and aunts and uncles, my father, not so much my mother, but they all spoke Italian. But then
right.
when it got to my generation, I learned a little, but I didn't learn a lot, because I was in that generation where they were like, no, we're only going to go into English. And
Hmm.
oh, I regret that, because
Yeah.
I wish I did speak Italian, and then I speak Spanish.
Right.
But similarities there too, like Portuguese. But
Right.
it's people a lot of times, like when you first asked, what can teachers do? It
Mhm.
is to really truly understand, respect, and appreciate why people speak the native language at home. Because so many times people will say, Well, I even had a teacher one time, and she was precious, but she said to me, I told dad to only speak English at home. And this was like a preschool kid.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I mean, she said it nicely, probably, but I know, like for my husband, who didn't come to the United States till he was 30, he spoke English well, but it wasn't like necessarily always proper English. So that's the same thing. They want to speak their own language at home for many reasons. One, if you go back to your native country, you want them to be able to speak to all the relatives and friends, and
Mhm.
or if grandparents are here, you want them to speak to them fluently, and just the respect. Um, because
Yeah,
I would always say, when you bring your baby home from from the hospital, you're not singing lullabies in English if that's not your first language. It's not your love language. You're singing in your own language, and our language is part of our heart, you know.
right.
And
Mm.
so to take that away from someone and not expect them to keep it and share it is not very respectful or understanding.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that partnership with the families, right? So, how can teachers build authentic partnerships with multilingual families, especially where there's a language barrier? So, I know first, don't tell them not to speak their native
Right. Don't tell
language.
them not to speak the
Oh,
language. Uh,
but what else could they do?
I would say it's funny. Adults are similar to kids, where
Mm,
I had parents before. If I was trying to speak, especially in my early days, if I was trying to speak English sometimes, and I remember one mom where she would only speak to me in Spanish, and then like 2 years later, her kid was in a room with an only English speaker, and I hear her talking. It was like, wait a minute, she speaks English really well. But I think a lot of times parents also speak more than
mhm,
we might know. And then they get
mhm,
nervous. They get really nervous because one thing is, and I don't mean to generalize, but with people I've worked with, in fact, in the summer, I used to work with kids from many countries. So many other countries really, really respect teachers. Like
mm,
very
mhm.
much.
Yes,
And so here you are in front of a teacher who you've been taught for your whole life to respect on high. And now you don't want to sound dumb. You don't want to sound like you don't know how to speak. So a lot of
mhm,
parents, I think, hold back.
mm,
I mean, I'm sure there are some parents
mhm,
who do not speak hardly at all, but I think a
mhm,
lot of parents at first hold back. And
mhm,
I don't think it's a bad thing to ask, um,
mhm.
how comfortable are you to speak in English? Or
Yeah.
is there a way that's best for you to translate? Because now, not like 35 years ago when I started to teach, because now there's all these apps where
Right.
you can just speak in and you can translate. And so there there are ways to be
Yeah.
talking to parents now that are
Yeah.
very easy.
Yeah, I thought you hit on something, right? Like just as easy, like you said, you could ask the parent, the family member, the caregiver,
Mhm.
how comfortable are you
How comfortable.
speaking in English? And I just thought of something else. Like you could also share with them your discomfort with speaking in their
Yes.
native language.
Yes.
And I really believe everybody can do this. I try to do this when I know there are multiple languages in a space that I'm going to be in over time. And that is to learn some basic
Yes.
sentences,
Yep. It's so important.
very
Yeah.
simple sentences. Like if you're going to be like for the teacher, you're going to tell all the kids to go to the bathroom. Can we learn
Yes.
it or have it around the room so you
You
don't
can
have to
have it
think about
written.
it? It's
Yep.
there,
And
right?
and you can
And okay,
put it in like the phonetics and parentheses so you
right.
can try. Because
Yes.
when you do try to say words,
Mhm.
the kid's face just lights up, and so do the
Yes.
parents,
That's why
because
I was going to say
they
adults
feel
too. Yeah,
comfortable. Yeah, they feel like you care. And
that's right.
I I I t- I wrote this article that I put up on Medium, and then I have to laugh. My kids would think it was funny. I'm telling you this. I
Mhm.
I DM'd Timothée Chalamet and said, "Want to write a kids book together?" And my kids are always like, "How'd that go, Mom?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think he's busy." Yeah, but
Hey, you never know.
well, I was listening. I really think he's a great actor, and I was listening to some of his earlier interviews, and
Hmm.
people will say, "How do you say your name?" And he would say it, "How do you say it properly?" And then I watched after a year or two, he would just go, "Oh, say it however you want." And I was like, "Really?" So
Right. Mhm.
anyway, I wrote this article. I referred to that, but I also wrote about how it's important to learn how to say the names.
That's
And people
names mean a lot.
yeah, and I'll say, I said, you know what? Most teachers get their roster about a week before school starts. And
Mhm.
all you need to do is make a list in bigger font, not little, so you can see it. Write the name and then phonetically write it so that you can try. And if you're not saying it correctly, just say to the child, "Come here, show me how to say your name. Say it
Yes.
slowly." Or put it into record it, how they're
Yes.
saying their name. Because
Yes.
there's so many people that will they just
Hmm.
don't try.
Hmm.
And they kind of get mad because they can't pronounce it. And then I even had, like, I remember having a second grader who the next year when he was in third grade, his name was Jorge. And the next year he's in third grade, and I heard people calling him George. And I was like, "Why are people calling you George?" And he said, "Oh, my teacher said that that was the English name and I should use that." I
Huh?
was like so upset. And
Mm.
because that's
Yeah.
I said in my article, like, it's the only thing they come with is their name, and it's such an important thing. I know in my class at Pitt,
Mhm.
I had many times, not in the teacher prep class because they were Chinese nationals and couldn't become
Mhm.
certified, but I had a lot of times kids from China who would talk about the meaning of their name, and like
Yeah.
each syllable means something. It was like, "Oh
Mhm.
my gosh." I mean, all the rest of the students were just so excited to hear this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
choose thing like, just that's one of the things to start off with, the name.
That's awesome. Now, and I want to thank you so much for spending time with us,
Thank you.
with me and the Rooted to Thrive tribe. How we'll have to wrap up now. So I want the people to know how they can find you after this.
Okay, about to open that website, mylearningscircle.org. And
Yeah.
that should be up and running in another week. And I am
Yeah.
going to start to, I have this idea to kind of do an interdisciplinary approach to social emotional learning, play, and higher level thinking skills, all through like play-based learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be there, and then on
Mm.
LinkedIn as well. And then hopefully doing some writing, I hope. But it's been so
Yes.
great. I'm so happy that you love talking about this. And you always did. Every time we
Yeah.
talked in our committee, you always talked about this subject.
Yeah, because I really do care about all children, like
Yeah,
really, and especially anybody that feels to me is falling through the cracks,
right.
right?
Yes.
Like that when they get the least of what they need. Like the people with the greatest needs
Right.
often need
Right.
more and they tend
Yes.
to get less. So I
Um,
really appreciate you. Your website will be up when
yes.
this airs
In this
because
next week. Yes.
we're pre-recording, so
Yes.
therefore it will be up
It will
for
be up. That's
sure.
right. Can I
For
say one more
sure.
thing real quick?
Just yep.
Not going to go down a rabbit hole with this, but when we do see so much happening out there with ICE and arrests and things like that, not going into that piece deeply, but just saying it's scary. So anybody out there with kids in their classrooms that are multilingual learners, even if it's not in their family, it's still scary. Because I know I used to tell my kids to carry their passport because I would get nervous. And so when anyone gets scared, they're going to have a harder time translating for those kids who are just learning the language. And it doesn't matter if they're Spanish speakers or any other language. It's scary and
Right.
worrisome. And so just to be extra patient, if you have kids, especially in cities where a lot of these things are happening all the time.
That's right. Yes. I mean, it could be happening at the school down the street.
Exactly. Yes,
Like,
definitely.
and they don't know the people. They know that this could happen to them.
They know, or
Yeah.
their parents not being
To know.
home when
Yeah,
school is over,
exactly.
which has
Exactly.
happened.
That's
Uh,
right. That's
so
right.
that scare, like being nervous and anxious, and sometimes missing school, uh,
Hmm.
it just
That's
means we
right.
have to be extra patient and understanding and respectful of what some families are going through.
Exactly. And I want to say this too, because I just thought about this. Yeah, I don't think as a child watched the news as much. We didn't have as many channels as
Right,
we had
right.
now. Well, first of all, people who are learning English actually often watch
Oh,
television.
yeah,
I know a lot of
definitely.
people who said
To learn.
I watched certain shows and that's how I learned English.
Yep, to practice.
So parents do it, the children are doing it. They're seeing what's going on,
Yeah,
even if it's not in their neighborhood.
right.
And of
It,
course, adults are talking about it around them as
right, exactly. And
well. So
it's scary.
that's critical. That's
Yeah,
critical. Well, and again, Anna, thank you so much. And I'm
thank
glad you
you.
stopped me and mentioned that because unfortunately, by the time this airs, I suspect this will still be an issue
Yep,
that we're dealing with. So
yep.
but today's conversation just reminds us overall that language isn't just a tool for communication.
Hmm.
It is a vessel for identity, memory,
Yes,
belonging. And Anna reminded us that teaching multilingual learners isn't about helping them catch up. It's about creating classrooms and spaces where every child's full self can
yes,
show up and thrive.
yes.
And I want to say this because we talk about classrooms a lot. We're talking to the out of school time folks too,
Oh, yes,
right?
definitely.
Right? Daycare,
Yes.
after school, before school programs, Saturday
Everyone,
programs,
yes.
yes, everywhere.
Yeah.
At the local, recreation center.
Hmm. Definitely.
Everyone who is touching the lives of these children needs to hear this.
Right. Agreed.
Yes, and when we see language diversity as an asset, not a deficit, we
Yes,
stop trying to fit children into systems and start reshaping systems around the children.
exactly. Because it
Yes,
surely is an asset, definitely.
that's right. So
Yeah,
whether you're a teacher, parent, lifelong learner, whoever, remember, every language a child speaks is a bridge to understanding, not a barrier to overcome. I,
exactly.
I am Rochelle Peterson-Ansari. Thank you for tuning in, for doing the work that keeps education human, inclusive, excuse me. If you haven't already, subscribe and
Mhm.
share this episode. I appreciate each and every one of you. I will be here waiting to welcome you back on the next episode of Rooted to Thrive.